Just before we start, we would like to acknowledge that this meeting is being held on the traditional lands of the Noongar people. Today we've got Michael Bourgon, who's a super smart guy, and we're all really privileged to have him here today. So Michael, over to you to start.
Thank you, appreciate it. Howdy, from Fort Worth, Texas, right next to Dallas. It is, 3:15 in the morning, so if I'm a little off, hopefully the caffeine is kicked in, but if not, we'll see what we can do. My name is Michael Bourgon. We're going to be covering what your machines are doing besides SQL Server. We're going to cover WMI, WQL, and some Powershell. First, the obligatory introductions, and by the way, thank you all again for having me. It's actually kind of cool to be able to say I presented in Perth, virtually this time, but anyhow. Got a blog, obviously, the Baking DBA. I'm not scary like Grant Fritchie, I'm not a rock star like Thomas LaRock, but I do like to bake. You can find me on Twitter. All the code you're seeing today is available already, either on my blog or I'll get with Cody afterwards and find a place to put it for y'all. You can also see some of my former presentations on YouTube. I've been a SQL DBA for right around 20 years now, SQL Server for 16. I've worked for college textbook publishing company. I've worked for a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund. Currently work for an ultra-large healthcare company. I'm the senior DBA there. We've got somewhere north of 130. I think right now we're probably about 150 instances. And we do millions of transactions a day. Our growth rate is gigabytes per day. And that being said, I'm a DBA. I'm an ops guy. That's where my heart is on this. I'm not a PowerShell guy. I'm not a Windows admin. But we do need those skills, and I'm going to show you why and show you some of the basics. This is not an advanced level course by any stretch, but hopefully get your feet wet, get you interested, show off some neat things that PowerShell will do for you, and some practical applications that you can use tomorrow if you wanted to. So, I don't know exactly how long we have here, but we have a ton to cover. So, hold on tight and let's see what we can do. Let's travel back first about 5 years. We had a problem with our in-house servers. We had an application that would randomly throw an error, and we needed to know when that error occurred. And as it happened, the way we had our infrastructure spread out, those servers also ran SQL Server. And so by proxy, I had sysadmin rights on the box. So, while the Windows system team were busy trying to get their stuff in order and trying to figure out how to tell what the problem was, I started looking at how I, as a SQL DBA, could chime in and help. We like to say that SQL is its own thing. I mean, it has its own memory manager, it kind of has its own file system, but when you get down to it, we are subject to the same problems that the server has. If a drive disappears, you're going to have a bad day. If your CPU starts having problems, it's not going to end well. If your memory is overcommitted because somebody else is running an application or they're monitoring an app or whatever, again, you're going to be affected. And it's not necessarily obvious within SQL Server what's going on. So we need to find a way to see what else is going on in the box. And so right off the bat, Event Viewer. Hey, we know what Event Viewer is. We use that thing all the time. Here we go. We can look here. And does this scale at all? No, not really. I can only click refresh so fast. So at the time, I used a Microsoft tool called Log Parser, which I still recommend. It's a good tool. It's actually released by Microsoft. It will parse all sorts of logs. I used it a couple months ago to parse some IIS logs so that we could figure out exactly which part of our website was being hit the most, so that we could go and tweak the queries that hit that part. Yes, we can get that from the plan cache. Yes, we can get that from our monitoring on SQL. But it's good to see what exactly the slowdowns or the perceived slowdowns, or just what the busy parts are. according to our customer, because at the end of the day, that's what we're doing. We're helping them solve problems. Downside to it was, I built this process 5 years ago. We solved our problem, stopped getting the errors, and I forgot about it. And fast forward to last summer, when we had a different problem. The application would randomly stop on us, and not a good thing. And as it turned out, my app was still running. I'd forgotten I'd left the job running. And here we were 5 years later. It had been slowly chunking away, adding records to it. But originally, it was running in an hour, half hour to an hour. It was now taking 8 hours. And as you can see here, the syntax, not exactly optimal. So I decided, okay, it's at the time, 2015. We know more than we did in 2010. SQL Server's newer, potentially. Windows Server's newer. What else is out there? And I started to experiment with PowerShell for this. And right off the bat, there's 2 different ways you can get event logs. There's get event log and get win event. And then there's this other thing that we're going to delve into a lot more called WMI. So first though, and apologies, I can't see you guys raise your hands, but PowerShell, who's familiar with it? If you're not, that's fine. If you are, you're a step ahead. PowerShell is, for lack of a better word, the future for scripting in Windows. Batch files were all well and good 10 years ago. We've evolved since then. Now, I'm an old school Unix guy. The first thing I noticed when I went on to PowerShell is that it uses a different object model. I'm used to pipelines. You take this command, run it through this object, run it through this other object, and there's your results. PowerShell uses what's called an object model, where it takes this object and passes the object or the results of the object through this, not really a pipeline, but close. Now, it's secure by default, which, as an admin, I kind of like. However, it can be a pain at times. So, I'm not saying you should do this. You should look into PowerShell security, and you should look at signing your scripts. But if you wanted to download my scripts and play along, or see what's going on with this, you can do this. Just run your scripts that way. Now, I had to do this on Windows Server 2003 boxes all the way up to 2012 R2. And so I decided to find the lowest common denominator for PowerShell, and that turned out to be version 2. Version 2 shipped with Windows Server 2003 SP2. If you're still on Windows 2003, there's not a lot I can do to help you. We're actually finishing up that ourselves. But right now we're on PowerShell 5, for instance, and there's been huge leaps and bounds in what PowerShell can do. In fact, these days on, for example, Exchange, there are things you can only do with PowerShell. You can't do it through the GUI. Now, we write SQL for a living. We type a lot. This is not an impediment. This is not a problem. This is an opportunity. So, back to get event log. Well, what's the advantage? Well, right off the bat there, it's really simple to run. Let's just do this. What's the newest error in my log? Hopefully y'all can see that. It says failed something. Well, we can get to that. Let's see. Rule 1 of demos, never type during a demo. But there's our error message. So consider this the cheater's version of a GUI for PowerShell. What I'm using here is called the PowerShell ISE. When you install PowerShell version 2 and above, I believe, you automatically get this. So a nice little app. It's very basic, but it does great for what we're trying to do. So the downside, though, is so we established it's really easy to run. Give me the new stuff. Give me everything after the past few days. Okay, that's great. However, overall, the filtering is kind of lackluster, we'll say. It also filters frequently after the fact. Say I just say get the application log, and then I have to filter it where whatever happens. Well, right off the bat then, it's got to wait for everything, or it's got to wait for a lot of it. Potentially on your land, there's a lot of data coming across. And then it has to filter it, and then it sends it on. Let's see what other ways there are. Well, there's this thing called getWinEvent. Well, right off the bat, it gives us an extra advantage, which is it will do what are called modern logs. That's not the right one. There we go. So, here are what are called the standard logs. You've got application security, these guys. You're familiar with them. But getWinEvent will get you all of these as well. And yes, these are all logs. For what I was doing, I didn't need it. So I was able to kind of cheat a little. Now, one advantage to getWinEvent is you can filter it before you send it on. Again, depending on what you're trying to do, that puts most of the processing on the server side, so that by the time it comes to you and your network, you're getting as fine-tuned a set of details as you can. Now, the easiest way to do that is what's called a filter hash table. If you're running Windows Server 2008 R2, you're fine. If you're running Windows 2008, you have to run the code on an R2 box. Yeah, it's like much like SQL Server. This runs like this on this version and like this on this version, right? Yeah, not great. It's also, in my experience, it's slow with large data sets. And I'm querying 150 servers, and there's some that have large data sets, that have large, basically, event logs. So you can update that and make it even faster by what's doing an XML query. Now, the disadvantage to an XML query is that it's ugly. What's it look like? Looks like that, which is not intuitive to me. So instead, I cheat. You go into, come on. There we go. Hey, look, I've exhausted my memory or something. Go in here, let's do a filter. I'm going to filter this log. We're going to look for, and then you go in here and you just copy and paste that. We can add that, we can say critical in the past 12 hours. And indeed, hey, look, the XML has updated. There's the system time. And then you copy that, and we go back over to here. And we paste it in. And then we just say getWinEvent, filter XML, and query. And now the processing is being done on our server itself, and it's just passing to us the results of that. Much faster. Potentially, I've seen it 10, I've seen it 30 times faster. Supposedly you can see it over 1,000 times faster. Now, at the time I had this other problem, which is, how do I know what exactly is faster? Well, PowerShell has this covered. They've got this thing here called measure command. And what that says is, tell us how long the following expression takes. So you take whatever query you're normally going to run, and you toss it in here, and voila. There's this. And we're just going to take a query here, and we're going to run measure command. Now, in this case, it took 806 seconds. Now, you could also comment this out and say, get all sorts of other information. Again, this is I'm showing kind of the basics of PowerShell here. But I personally like being able to say, oh, that job you asked me to take, that's going to take 5.48 times 10 to the negative 6 days. Sure thing. And they stare at me a lot like you guys are probably staring right now. Okay, good. That being said, you can just put this back in and get how many milliseconds? That's what we care about, 520. Okay, cool. So far we've covered get event log, get one event. Works for most people, works for most things. Now I'm going to raise my hand here. I don't know if you can see it, but let me just start reading this quote. I love this quote. When working with WMI, do not forget you are also using Windows PowerShell. Often the results are more easily obtainable via standard Windows PowerShell techniques. Unless you are returning massive amounts of data from across bandwidth-constrained remote servers, it is very cost-effective in terms of productivity to waste hours of your time trying to perfect that when there is a perfectly acceptable pure Windows PowerShell alternative. Yeah, our WAN sucks. I'll flat out say it. Our systems people don't like to hear it. Our network people don't like to hear it. It could be better. And so I started looking to see what I could do that was even faster. And so we went down the rabbit hole for a few weeks. And I came out with WMI. What is WMI? Well, if you're not familiar with it, and in all likelihood you probably aren't. I really wasn't either. I'd heard the term and that was about it. It's short for Windows Management Instrumentation. Now, it's supported all the way back to XP. It came with 2K, but you can actually go and download stuff for XP. But again, if you've got that kind of problem, you've got other problems. It's based off a WBEM standard, which Microsoft, of course, decided to embrace extend. And the advantage, though, is that it's supported in pretty much every major other operating system. All the various Unices, Linuxes, even those Mac guys. It is used by default by some of the Microsoft tools. System Center, Configuration Manager, SQL Sentry uses it, I believe Quest Spotlight uses it, and it's been around forever, and I'm not kidding. Some of the code that you'll see today is from 2000. I mean, I'm using 16-year-old code and it still works just fine. Okay. It also means that when you go looking on the forums, someone's probably already solved that problem, and they probably solved it 5 years ago. So you're not going to be going, well, it's this new thing, it's how do we do it? No, there's people out there who are experts at this stuff, and they've been experts for a long time. I personally like this quote right here. The M in WMI stands for magic. So, what does WMI give us? Well, it gives us 4 things. Automation, queries, eventing, remoting. We're going to cover all of those. You can access it a variety of ways. Everything from VB script to C shell, Posh. I think there's a adapter for J# too. Now, if you're familiar with getting the event log, then the first thing you're going to find out is that the permissions are not the same. You will need what's called distributed COM users group. Not the same as what's required to read the event log. 3 ways to hit that. Get WMI object, get sim instance, and finally, and yeah, those brackets are mandatory, WMI searcher. In my experience, it's a lot faster than doing get event log or get win event. And I'm not talking 30 seconds versus 29 seconds. I'm talking 3 versus 20. Again, your mileage may vary. This is what works for me. The other cool thing is, one is the breadth of what you can pull out of it. We'll kind of cover some of that. And the other thing is you can actually change things with it. It's not just getting the data, it's changing the data. So back here I said sim instance WMI. What is sim? Well, sim is short for the Common Information Model. WMI worked great. It is being supplanted with sim. Every release, sim is getting better. There's more stuff in there. And it's nicer overall. It provides some niceties that WMI does not. However, my original problem was on Windows 2003 boxes, and I wasn't about to be able to get the systems guy to install the patches and the extra packs in order to get that running on those ancient boxes. WMI it is then for me. So, we've shown basic query. Yes, there are GUIs for it. We're just going to cover a couple of them real fast. One of them comes with built-in, if you type WBEM test.exe on a server that has WMI, you're going to get this. Okay, this is pretty much as bare bones as you're going to be able to get. Let's see, 1, 2, 3. Okay, cool. So these are all the processes running on this VM right now. If I click on one, it will give me even more details. In fact, we can even pull this out. I'm not sure how much of this you can see, but there we go. It's all sorts of stuff. Everything from how much memory it's using to where it's running from. So, and again, we can do stuff based off this and with it. That being said, this thing's about as bare bones as you can get. Now, the next one I use is called Scripto Medic, and it's written by the guys on this one blog called Hey Scripting Guy. And this is really cool. It will show you all the different options here. Hey, Perth raw data Microsoft SQL Server. That may come in handy. Overall, though, 630 different things we can query. That's nice, and this will actually build a real basic query for you. But finally, and this is the one I use almost all the time, if I can find it. WMI Explorer. This, again, all these tools are totally free. And this one has the advantage of showing you not just the basic list like we had before, but it will also actually tell us, here's what the heck everything on here means. And here are all the things we can do with it. So in this case, we can actually get the owner for this process. I needed to know that in one case because we were trying to figure out who was running Excel on one of our servers. Yeah. So, that being said, I like command line. It's a whole lot easier once you get through the basics. So, how do we invoke Windows Management Instrumentation via PowerShell? Well, like we said before, there's get WMI object and get sim instance. WMI object has a couple of nice things, and it's what I typically go to. It allows alternate credentials, which means you can log in using a different admin account. It's usable all the way from XP on up, and it uses what's called DCOM for remote access. Get sim instance is going to require Windows Server 2008 or above, PowerShell 3. If you're doing a whole bunch of commands, it's got some really cool features. If you're just running like a query here and there, it's going to take longer because it has to spin up this new secure connection and there's overhead involved. Now, what can you get out of WMI? There's a whole bunch. Ironically, not all of these work. I was actually looking at ODBC attribute right before this presentation, and that one tried to hang my box. It doesn't actually come back. Neither does Win32 fan, which is kind of a pity because it'd be kind of cool to be able to show, hey, look, here's what the fans look like on my machine. But there's a whole lot of other stuff in here that does work. Win32 NT log event, NT log event log, NT domain, registry. There's a bunch. Play, please, if nothing else out of this presentation. Go onto your own box, grab a copy of WMI Explorer, or just launch the PowerShell ISE, or just launch PowerShell and run a couple of queries. Now, what kind of queries? Well, how would we normally query it? Real easy. Get WMI object, namespace, and that's basically the path. And then for almost everything we do, it's going to be under root and /simv2, and we can list it. Now, that would get you this, which is not very readable. So, instead we're going to use a different command. GWI is an alias. It's a shortcut for get WMI object. And we're going to tell it list because we're going to assume that we're using root simv2, that's our default. And then instead, we're going to select out just the stuff we need, path and properties. And finally, we're going to send it over to the out grid view that we were talking about a minute ago. And voila, here's all the stuff. And this should look really familiar with what WMI Explore and WBEM test and everything were showing us a few minutes ago. Again, there's all sorts of stuff in here. Lots of things we can look at if we are so desire. And then also what's nice is you can actually type in there, filter, you can order. Nice little PowerShell trick. Just pipe it out to out grid view. Type symbol. So. And indeed, look, there's a bunch of SQL Server stuff in here too. And these are all just, well, we'll see if we have time to play with one. Okay, so back to doing basic queries. Get WMI object, Win32 operating system. Now, again, I can't see y'all, so hopefully there's some hands that come up. Who here has changed the power plan, the default power plan, on their Windows servers? Okay, who has not? Who knows why this matters? Okay, so, long story short, by default, Microsoft decided that Windows Server should use what's called a balanced power plan. Why? I have no idea. I spent a whole lot of money on servers, and I really didn't want them to cripple it and say, hey, let's run in really, I don't know, slow mode. We'll say that. So instead, what you do is you change that power plan. Yes, this does matter on VMs as well. You should change it on your host. You should change it on your guests. You may even need to change it in the BIOS because the slower of the bunch wins. Fortunately, in PowerShell, it's really easy to fix. So, by default, let's see if I actually left things in the right case. I actually have already set this sucker to true for high performance. By default, if you look on a Windows Server box, it will say balanced mode unless you've already changed it. Hint, your admins may not even know about this or that it matters. Why? Because most of the time it doesn't. In my case, we do millions of transactions a day, and we have things that parse claims, and it doesn't really deal with the ebb and flow of claims real well. It will say, well, we're not busy enough, so we don't need to spin up the processor. By forcing it to, by setting it to high performance mode, we instantly got a 25% performance boost. Free. Well, technically free, to me. On the bean counter side, well, you're using more CPU because you're using more electrons, you're using more power, you're generating more heat. At the end of the day, though, again, why are we buying these fast, ultra-expensive machines? Because we want them to run as fast as they can. How do we do that? Real easy. All we're doing here is we're setting this PowerShell time, we're setting the variable, and we're saying power, root v2 power, and we're saying the class is power plan, and we're setting our filter to high performance. And then we would just activate it. That's our variable, and this is a method. And it's probably going to throw an error because it's already, actually it's because I didn't do it right. If we look, if we do this, let's see, and then rerun our original, you'll see I rolled this sucker back to balanced, and back to high performance. Yes, it's that easy, provided that it's properly set in the BIOS. Free performance, guys, but you're going to have to look and make sure. In all likelihood, Glenn Beery has a great article about it. Aaron Bertrand also has a great article about it. Short story, please take a look. Hopefully this is some free performance you can get courtesy of WMI. So, other things we can do with WMI, what's called an accelerator, which I'm not a Windows guy, so I'm not sure why some of these matter. You can use the WMI, and you could say, instead of filtering on schedule, you could say, give me this. Okay, sure. You could also actually run something remotely by doing this. Yeah, not really all that impressive on its own, but realize that we just spawned a session, and you can do this remotely, of anything on the server. So hopefully this is giving you guys some ideas. Other accelerators, and this one is probably my favorite for what will be obvious here in a sec. WMI Searcher. Now, it's kind of crippled in some regards. It doesn't have alternate credentials. However, it gives you a couple things that GWMI doesn't offer. Timeouts, error action, and let's actually run one of those. Okay, stop. Root SimV2, that's our default. We're going to do that. Options, we're going to let it time out after 30 seconds, and we're going to run it. And what's that tell us? Well, not much. I'm running a VM. It's just telling me about my VM. However, some of you may look at that and go, wait a minute. This looks somewhat familiar. Indeed. Welcome to WQL, which is short for WMI query language. It is a subset of SQL. It is pretty darn useful, but it is limited. It's not all commands. We'll get to the commands on the next page. And by default, it puts you in root SimV2, which is basically the WMI path. You can change that though. And you'll note here, double backslashes on paths. Not a big deal, but worth mentioning. So there are three different types of queries we can get out of this. The first one is a data query. That's what we've been doing. The second one is an event, and we're going to cover eventing in a few minutes. And what that says is when things change, do something. Finally, there's a schema, which is essentially metadata. It's objects about objects, how things relate, what's involved in the networking stack. Show me everything down that path. We're not really going to cover that. So, what does it look like if we put that together? Well, here we go. GWMI query, and let's just pop back over here. Okay, we're gonna, let's see, GWMI query, select star from Win32 process, where caption is like ISE, and caption is basically the name. If I run that, we get all sorts of information here. Everything from memory usage, page file usage, the path that it runs on. There's a whole lot of it, and the rest of these that are all the underscores are basically the object that we were talking about earlier with Powershell. Practically though, there's our path. Here's when it started running. Here's how much memory it's been using. Actually, yep. Virtual size, how much CPU time it's been using, etc., etc. All of this is kind of useful, and we'll build on it. So you could use the filter instead, but and you'll see in my code where I use both. It's all what's easier and more familiar. I like where clauses. They're really simple. I like writing where clauses. It's kind of what I've been doing for 20 years. Not all clauses work. You can't say select count, for instance. It'll just choke. You can do the equivalent in PowerShell. You pipe that over to a counter measure. Here are all the commands we get. It's not a ton of them. And there's some weird ones here that we'll cover here in a few minutes, like is a. But that gives you some idea. Now, you may be saying, well, practically, what does this get me? Is this something that I will actually use? Well, it's a tool. It's a tool for your toolkit. It's not a hammer. It's not a Dremel. It's somewhere in between. I use the heck out of it from time to time. For instance, earlier we mentioned that Excel process. Well, In this case, we were able to tell who owned it, what process or what user started it. But there's another method for this one, for instance, called kill. So we were able to remotely kill that extra hanging Excel session that SSIS had hung, or that was causing SSIS to hang, that job at least. Now, we also had a problem where we used this monitoring app, and we found cases where it was using 2 gig on a 4 gig server. Thanks. Yeah, that would explain the really crappy performance on those boxes. And the Windows people really hadn't looked. They really didn't care because their stuff was working just fine. The SQL stuff, that's the DBA's problem. Well, yes and no. Once we pointed out, yeah, your app's using 2 gig, and they were like, no, it's using 200, it's using 25 meg. No, here it is, it's using 2 gig. Oh. I guess we'll get with the vendor and patch it then. Yeah, how about you do that? Another case was there was a app we tried putting on our machines at one point in time, and it never got properly uninstalled off all of them. So in this case, we said, give us, for each of our servers on our list, we went to it and we said, hey, let's look at the services where it's running. And you get that back in about 30 seconds when you're running it on your 150 instances. And you say, okay, hey systems guys, go and install that, please. Now, if you want to get really fancy, this is actually code I was running in production. I hope I've scrubbed it so suitably. And we won't get too much into this because there's really what we care about is this part right here. Select server, actually it's Win32 process for our server where it's this name. And essentially we said, go get our list of servers. Once you have that, go to each server, find out how long the app has been running, tell us how many hours it's been live. And we actually had that running throughout the day that in case of an issue, they would get a report that said, oh, hey, this is crashed or restarted automatically. You guys need to go check out the error logs. Now, should I be the one writing this? I don't know. Was it a nice challenge? Sure. So I'll take it. And again, this is actually what I ran in production. And it looks like a lot, but really when we get down to it, it's that Win32 process. And we could have easily rewritten that, and I probably should at some point. But select star from Win32 process where name equals our internal app and creation date is not null. And then from there, we just reformat it and return it. So, back to my original problem from 5 years ago to last year, going through all our servers and pulling the event logs. This is code that's already in production. It runs, I think the subset I'm currently doing it now is something like 90 servers, and it takes about a minute and a half. And so we run it every 10 minutes, and we've got a series of of reports that come off of it. And yes, our systems folk are running apps that supposedly do the same thing, but I'm here to tell you, my app's better. If only because, one, I've got 5 years of history behind it. They keep a week. So if I need stuff to see when a problem occurred, like maybe after a deploy started, they may not be able to provide that 6 weeks down the line. I certainly can. Also, I can get information that's really relevant to me in a really short period of time, every 10 minutes. Heck, I could do it every 5. What's the code look like? Well, again, this is going to look impressive or maybe just imposing, but in reality it's not. Because when we get down to it, all we're doing is we're getting a list of servers. Here's our list. We're going to truncate our staging table. And then finally we're going to, in parallel, we do 8 servers at a time. We load the data. There's a whole bunch of code in here that's essentially not essential. Here's the actual heart of it though. Select the details out of the event log. For each event, we do application and system, I think. Since the last time we ran it, how do we know? It's in our table. So we pulled that at the very beginning. We take that, and then we go and we get fancy and we format it. We say time generated and we convert it because it's not really a useful time. It's that long, crappy string of digits that you'll see 2015 or 2016, 0224, and then the whole time stamp. But this is all just formatting. The heart of it is this one statement where we're just selecting from Win32 NT log event. There's other stuff they're supposed to put in the database. Behind the scenes, it's actually not all that complex either. The biggest impediment would be I do use full text indexing, and that's purely because then I can create a whitelist and a blacklist that says anything from this server with this stuff gets deleted, anything with this string in it, never delete. And that way I can basically narrow it down and get actually useful emails. I don't like getting crappy emails that, oh, yeah, I don't really care about this. No, we're better than that. We're DBAs. Finally, let's see. Oh yeah, max pipelines, we're running 8 at once. So that's all there is to it. Get with me or Cody. You can ping me on Twitter. I will post the code on my blog. It's currently available via SQL Saturday 461, which is SQL Saturday Austin 2016. Everything you're seeing here, all these examples, the slide deck, all of it, it's already available. I hate being the guy who's like, oh, well, let me post it in a few weeks. No, go grab it. At 461, I actually said, go grab it right now and play along. I don't think anybody did, though. So, basically what we did, staging table, see what we had, ran in parallel. We used our full text remover, which is stored procedure, remove the crap, and insert into our view, and we insert into a view so behind the scenes, we're creating new tables. And each table's for a month, and that way you can narrow it down, you can put constraints on it and make it fast. And when they inadvertently run a deploy that adds 2 million records in about 4 hours, you can go just to that one table and prune it without affecting the other tables. What's it look like at the end? Well, amazingly dull. I mean, let's be honest here. These are event logs. Yes, there's stuff we care about, but most of the time it's just text. It's what you do with it. Hey, look, I had a package fail. Great. So, we've covered a lot. Hopefully I'm not going too fast. I probably am. I tend not to breathe during my sessions. My apologies. But there's so much other cool stuff in here that I want to show off. And I'm probably running low on time already. Let's see how far we can get. Eventing. This is something that is really cool and we're going to just barely touch on. But you can do so much with it. You can do everything from when did stuff change on my server to when did stuff change within SQL Server. Are we about to run out of disk space? You can actually set a threshold, and when it crossed it, well, actually when it crosses it, it'll write to the event log. But eventing, let's actually cover the slide deck. You've got intrinsic. Intrinsic is the WMI model when things change. Win32 process is an example of the model. When something changes in there, you could have it return something or do something. It runs on a polling interval. In production, you probably want to run no quicker than 30 seconds. You're not going to lose things, it's just you're not going to get notified until 30 seconds later. It runs on a timer. You've got extrinsic, which is response to changes outside the model. The example I always hear is changes to the registry. If something changes to the registry, immediately you can have it do an action. We've got several actions, we'll cover that here in a second. Finally, there's a timer, which is periodic, and that's just like X seconds. There's some really neat papers out there. One that I cite at the very end of the slide deck is a Black Hat presentation where they talk about how to install malware through WMI. And one thing they do is 60 seconds after you log in, they do something because they're waiting for you to log in. You've got temporary and permanent. Temporary lasts until the end of that session, if you're running it in PowerShell until you close PowerShell. Permanent will survive reboots. We'll actually look at a couple. So, is eventing a big deal? No, it looks like what we've been doing. Select star from, and in this case you'll see this double underscore. This says instance creation event. We've got creation, modification, and deletion. And they're basically what you think. Creation event, we started a new application. Modification event, this service changed. Deletion event, the antivirus app crashed. So select start from whichever event you need within however often you want to poll. Like I said, in production I wouldn't recommend more often than 30. And you say where target instance is a ISA. Why they couldn't use equal, no idea. Win32 logon session in this case. And in this case, and logon type equals 2. Again, this looks like a basic SQL query, and it pretty much is. The logon type in this case, that means interactive session. So you could use this to poll for new people logging onto your machine. In my case, I could not get this part working, but it's still a good example. So let's actually create a temporary one. Okay, we're going to poll every 3 seconds because, well, we've only got so much time in here. And when it does, we're going to actually kick off that. And this is just going to write to the console. Okay, there's that. Hey look, new process. And you'll get both of them when you spawn command. And really that's it. That's all we have to do. We said register the event. There's our action, is just write to the host. That's it. Now I could either end it by unregistering the event, or I could just close this window. And we'll do it the proper way. Now, permanent gets a little more interesting. Because now we're talking about storing stuff in the WMI registry. Like I said, it'll survive restarts. And we need 3 different parts. The first is the filter, which is basically this query here, is a Win32 process and your where clause. The consumer is what we want to do with it. And the binding is basically just tying the two things together. Let me be very cautious here. One, you do have to run these as admin. My PowerShell ISE is actually running as admin on the box, not just as my credentials. Please be careful. At this point, the permanent eventing will pass a reboot. It will survive reboots, and you can put yourself theoretically in a really bad state. Try it out, get it working on a test box, then slowly push it out. Caveat emptor, but please be careful. I'm not trying to scare you away from it. I use this stuff. But I don't want you guys accidentally locking yourselves out of your box, and it's my fault. So, what can we do with, we said right here, consumer. What are our options? Well, these 5 technically, the 6th one is right around. Hopefully give you everything you can even imagine about doing on a Windows box. The first one is active script event consumer, which says run an arbitrary script. It runs as admin because that's how all this stuff runs behind the scenes. You've got your log file event consumer, which says write to a file, a log file, but it's a file, text file, whatever. There's NT event log event consumer, which writes to the event log. And now that we have something that will actually collect event log entries, that could come in really handy. We have a command line event consumer. It runs a command line. Again, you could spawn an app, you could You could do almost anything. Same with the run the arbitrary script. SMTP event consumer could send you an email. Note that it does not provide a SMTP server by default. You have to tell it where to send it. And finally, like I said before, custom write your own. Eventing in action. Now, if you're running Windows Server 2008 R2, like I am, you will see this. This is another tool that's written by people smarter than me, and this one will actually tell you, it's a nice little GUI for this type of stuff. And in this case, these are the two defaults. You get this BVT filter and SCM event log filter. They're running on your machine. If you run R2, it's on here. Let's see what they do. Well, this first one, okay, we know how to read this stuff. Select start from instance modification event. Let me scroll over so I can zoom in. Instance modification within 60, where target instance is Win32 processor, and load percentage is greater than 99. Okay, cool. So what that says is whenever the CPU is at 100% on that during that interval, we're going to do something. Oh, that's kind of cool. What's it do for us? Well, it runs this C script kerncap.bbs. Where is that script? C tools kern rate. Well, I don't know about y'all. I don't have that folder. As far as I know, nobody does. When you go looking online for this thing, you'll find people worried that they have a malware infection because they have this. In reality, Microsoft must have shipped this at some point and never cleaned up after themselves. That script is gone, but theoretically, if you did put a VB script called kerncap in that folder, when the CPU hit 100%, it would automatically run that. Interesting. So the other one is basically just SCM. Cody, how much more time do I have? 10 minutes? 20? I don't know.
Yeah, about 20 minutes, tops.
Okay, great. Okay. Then we will blitz through the rest of this. Okay, WMI eventing. Here's the app. This is called Posh Event. And you can actually, these are the actual commands if you just want to run it and without the command line and see what's in there. So, now let's create a permanent event. So we've already established Microsoft has a couple on there. Right here is mine that I'll do here in a sec. But what can we do with it? Well, again, we can do almost anything we want with it. In this case, we're going to do something really simple. We're just going to, let's bring it up. We're going to, again, here it's 5 seconds because this is a demo. We're going to look for changes when instance modification event. We're going to look for changes in services. And when it does that, we're going to write to this file, ctemp. And just to prove there's nothing up my sleeves, this folder's empty. Okay. We'll write just a change has occurred on the service, there's your target instance, and we'll write that to the file. Finally, we need our binder, and then let's actually put this all together. Okay, started successfully right there, and there's our file. Changes occurred on the application experience. You could put more stuff in here like what has changed. Again, there's anything from that very, very, very beginning piece you can put in here. It's just a matter of futzing with it. Removing it is likewise very simple. Ironically, running this the first time, you have to almost put this verbose thing in here, and then it returns it. And that's how you know it actually got rid of it, because otherwise you run it again and you don't get anything. So, that's the ultra basic version. We just ran, and again, we wrote to the file. We could write to the event log. We could restart a service. The options really are unlimited. It's just a matter of tweaking it and playing with it and seeing what you're comfortable with. You could get really fancy. If you were a sysadmin type, you'd push down a group policy object that said, that added that permanent event to all your servers, and then they would run it over to this Windows Server collector, and then you could view it in Event Viewer. Now, we've got just enough time for one more demo, and this is probably the most fun one of the bunch. And this is my heart and soul. I have an entire presentation that goes just into the different aspects of this stuff. It's called Event Notifications. In our case, it's called a WQL event query on SQL Server. This goes back to 2006, SQL Server 2005 and above. You can do this. What can you do? A lot, actually. Okay. So behind the scenes, Microsoft has this really strong auditing option called Event Notifications. And what that says is when DDL events occur on your server, that's any data definition stuff, and a whole bunch of other stuff, including trace events, deadlocks, block processes, autofile, autogrow. There's literally, I think there's over 600 of them as well. Anything you can think of, you can actually trace on. And that's within SQL Server. I use it behind the scenes, a much more expanded version that takes all my, I think on that setup, I'm over 100 servers. It takes all of them, and within 1/10 of a second, it combines them on one central server, and I can tell you, and then we check that into TFS. So we can actually go back 6 months and say, when did this get deployed, who deployed it, what did it look like, what app did they run it with. There's all sorts of things you can do. Today we're going to do a very, very limited version, but it's very, very simple to set up. Event notifications are WMI, or you can do it through WMI. Basically, you write your WQL query, it queries the SQL Server engine, which sends it via service broker. The too long didn't read version of that is, you can do in SQL Agent a query. That query will be acted on by the SQL Server, and there are very few things you need to do in order to have that happen. First thing you need is database mail has to be enabled. Why? Because then Service Broker is enabled on that database, and behind the scenes everything works magically. And I do mean that word. This is some really cool stuff, but there is a certain amount of hocus pocus. But in my experience, it's glorious. Second prerequisite, you have to be running SQL Server 2005 SP1 or above. If you're running 2005 RTM, heck, if you're running 2005, you've got bigger problems. But this will work on 8, R2, 12, 14, 16. You have to enable this token replacement in SQL Server Agent Properties, Alert System, very bottom. You check that. That's all you need to do. And then, what's it look like? Well, let's actually look on SQL Server. First thing we need to do is we create a job. In this case, the job is really simple. And all this is actually, normally you have SQL Server Event Alert. You change it over to WMI Alert, and you get this. Actually, let's see. Here's our job. You have to create the job first, and I always click on the alert first because it's shinier. So we run step 3 because I'm running multiple versions of it. Again, this code is all available. This is really basic stuff. Let's zoom in on it. Okay. All we're doing is making sure our table exists. If it doesn't, it creates it. The next thing it does is it takes the parameters passed to it, and it uses that to insert into the event log tracking database events table the details that the job was just passed. Job runs every minute. The alert runs every minute. If the alert does find something, it kicks off this job. So the first thing you do is you create this job. Not much to it. This is literally the only step you need. The second thing you do is you create this alert. And normally when you create an alert, let's create an alert. You get this SQL Server event alert. And then you say, oh, I need to be watching the 17s and the 24s and all that stuff. Well, in this case, we go over instead, where shall I go over to WMI event alert. And this is, again, this is built in, this is all standard features. And then in here you put whatever you want to actually query. And we're going to do a very, very stripped down version, because this is a demo. Select star from create database. So anytime a database is created, this alert will fire. It will execute our job, and that's why we did the job first. And then you can do other stuff. As you can see, I play with this once in a while. Practically, what happens, let's make sure this is working. Okay. Create. Never ever type during a demo, kids. Okay, and now, sometime within the next minute, this job will fire. And because I'm doing this as a live demo, it will almost assuredly be as close to a minute as you can get. Once it fires, though, it'll fire off this job, which we already said runs this step 3 in this case, and it's just going to write to it server name, database name, post time, and login name. Essentially, who did what. And again, you can expand this. You can do a lot more with it. Look at the event notifications and WMI alerts to see just all the different stuff you can do. Oh, there it goes. Okay, cool. So now we go back here, and we run this part, and lo and behold, here we go. The login name, this the standard admin account for me, and we did it right now. This is power, kids. Seriously, this is one of the most amazing things that flies under the radar on SQL Server. You can tell when things occur on your box. You don't have to look at creation dates. You don't have to look at, or you don't have to figure out when people deployed that code. You go in there and it will tell you immediately, well, within a minute, what's changed. Like I said, you can get really advanced with this. This is a real basic example, but all you really require is a couple different things. What can you set this for? Instead of create database, you could do create stored procedure, alter view. You could do, there are different groups you can nest on top of it. And it really is one of those things, in my mind, I personally rate myself somewhere on like a 7 or 8 on a scale of 1 to 10. Paul Randall, those guys, they're all 10s, probably 11s. And I went from a 6 to a 7 when I started incorporating this stuff. Because instead of having to be reactive, well, you're still reactive. You're still getting told, hey, something's wrong, but you don't have to be. You could have this send you an email when it occurs. Hey, such and such created a brand new database, such and such altered a view, such and such dropped a table. And you get that immediately, or you get that written to a table, you roll it up, you send out reports, and you know a lot more about your environment than you did before. Our environment right now is kind of loosey-goosey. A lot of people have abilities to do a lot of stuff. If you've got everything locked down, if you're using CI, then what's actually running in production is really limited. I'm not there yet. So instead, I use this to tell you what my world looks like. Every morning we get periodic reports from this stuff. We get one that says every hour, hey, these particular type of things occur, because I want to know about those. Every morning we get hey, here's what people have done in the database in the past day. And that covers everything from deploys to us emergency adding indexes or whatever. But this is just the tip of the iceberg as far as I'm concerned. Please, if nothing else, take a look at this stuff. It's really simple. All you need is an alert and a job and a table, and you can track almost anything. And indeed, like I said, the code's already in here. It works. Be careful expanding it. I mean, create database is awesome because that doesn't happen often. If you were to do a full select star from basically alter table, or the top level one, which is way back here somewhere, server events, be more careful because there's a whole lot of things going on in your server you typically don't know about. But this is a perfect introduction to it. Add this code to a job, add this alert. That's it. Remoting, I think we're about to run out of time. Basically, the short version is Windows remoting is powerful. It's sort of what we've been doing to a certain extent, which is tell the server to do all this stuff and just give us back the bare minimums. There's a lot of requirements you may need. Fortunately, Windows Server 2012 and above have it built in. It's encrypted, it's secure, you can do almost anything remotely, and you can do it en masse. And I have a ton of servers, so the more things I can automate and test it a couple times, and then run it on 20 servers at a time, the happier I am. The example they have is really a bad example, but it does give you some idea. Instead of they ran this one query, instead of taking 374 minutes, it took 15 seconds. Simple example, enabling it's fairly decent. Let's see. Any questions?
I don't think there's any questions. No.
Okay. Was this helpful to y'all? Hopefully so.
It seems to be yes.
Okay.
Yes!
Like I said, this is a beginning course, but hopefully it's useful.
Okay, awesome. Great. Well, thanks for that, and thanks for waking up so early for us. And it's really appreciated. Thanks a lot.
Thank you all very much for having me. Have a good afternoon.